I didn't do it. Mama, help me. Mama, I didn't do it. I am innocent.
Cicilia was a woman who knew nothing but hardship. She had grown up in a small village, the youngest of 5 children in a poor family. Her parents had struggled to feed them, and school was never an option. By the time she turned 15, she was already hawking food items on the streets to survive. When she got pregnant out of wedlock, the man responsible, a smooth-talking trader from Lagos, vanished the moment she told him. Cicilia had cried and begged, but he had simply shrugged. "I'm not ready for a child," he had said before leaving and never returning. Left alone, ashamed, and with no family to support her, Cicilia moved to Onitsha, a bustling city where traders filled the streets. There, she started selling fruits by the roadside. It was a tough business, standing under the hot sun, dodging reckless drivers, and shouting to attract customers, but it put food on her table. When her daughter, Zara, was born, Cicilia felt a new sense of purpose. She wanted to give her child a better life, even though she had nothing. From the moment Zara could walk, she followed her mother everywhere, watching and learning. By the age of 5, she could count money, and knew how to arrange the fruits neatly on a tray. Life was not easy, but Cicilia found comfort in her daughter's laughter. Zara was a bright girl, full of energy and kindness. People in the market liked her, because she was always cheerful and polite. "Buy apples. Buy fresh oranges," she would call out in her small, but confident voice, running towards moving buses, waving her fruits at passengers. Unlike Cecilia's neighbor, Mama Fatima, who also sold fruits a few steps away, Cicilia and Zara always kept their fruits fresh. They washed their apples, oranges, and bananas daily, making sure they looked clean and appealing. People naturally preferred to buy from them. Mama Fatima, however, was different. She was a big, rough-looking woman with a deep voice and a permanent scowl on her face. She rarely washed her fruits, and her store was always dirty. Flies hovered over her rotten oranges, and her bananas were either too ripe or too hard. Her clothes were unkempt, and her hair, thick and tangled, smelled of sweat. Customers avoided her, and this made her bitter. Each day, she sat on a wooden stool, watching as Cicilia and Zara made sales while her own fruits remained untouched. It infuriated her. "People are foolish," she would mumble to herself. "Just because they look neat, they think they are better than me." As time passed, Mama Fatima's anger turned into jealousy. She wanted Cicilia and Zara gone. She wanted the customers to have no choice but to buy from her. She waited and watched, thinking of a way to destroy them. And then, one fateful day, she found the perfect opportunity. The sun was high in the sky, casting sharp shadows on the busy streets of Onitsha. Cicilia and Zara had been working since morning, their voices blending with the noisy traffic. The air was thick with the smell of roasted corn, fried plantains, and the sweat of traders who had spent hours under the scorching sun. "Buy apples. Buy fresh oranges," Zara called out as she balanced a tray of neatly arranged fruits on her head. She ran from one moving vehicle to another, stretching her small arms towards passengers in need of a quick snack. Cicilia stood nearby, watching her daughter with pride. Zara had grown into a smart and hard-working girl. She knew how to talk to customers, how to smile just enough to make people want to buy from her. She was quick with her hands, too, able to collect money and give change in seconds. On the other side of the street, Mama Fatima sat behind her dirty stall, her arms folded across her chest. Her blood boiled each time she saw customers buying from Cicilia and Zara instead of her. The jealousy in her heart had grown into deep hatred. She had waited long enough. It was time to act. As if fate was on her side, an opportunity presented itself that afternoon. A bus had stopped near the market, its windows rolled down. Several hawkers rushed towards it, pushing and shoving to get their goods in front of the passengers. Zara was among them, her small hands holding out a bunch of ripe bananas to a man sitting by the window. Then suddenly, a loud, piercing voice filled the air. "Thief! Thief!" People turned their heads in confusion. It was Mama Fatima, her finger pointing directly at Zara. "I saw her. That girl just put her hand inside that man's pocket and stole his money." The market went silent for a split second before chaos erupted. Passengers inside the bus checked their pockets. One man, looking confused, patted his trousers and gasped. "My money is gone," he shouted. The crowd grew thick around Zara. Traders, pedestrians, and idle young men rushed towards the scene. Some shouted. Some pointed. Others simply stood there, eager to witness the drama. Zara's heart pounded in her chest. Her hands trembled as she shook her head. "No. I didn't steal anything," she cried, her voice cracking with fear. But the crowd was not listening. "Thief! Burn her!" someone shouted from behind. "Jungle justice! She must pay for her crime," another voice echoed. Tears streamed down Zara's face. She turned her head frantically, looking for her mother. "Mama," she screamed. Cicilia, who had been attending to a customer a few meters away, turned at the sound of her daughter's cry. She saw the crowd, the angry faces, the hands reaching for Zara. Panic shot through her. She dropped her tray of oranges and ran towards them. "Wait! She is innocent!" Cicilia shouted, pushing through the crowd. But the mob was already out of control. People grabbed Zara by her arms, dragging her to the center of the street. Someone brought out a car tire. Another man held a bottle of petrol. Zara struggled. "Please! I didn't do it. Mama, help me." Cicilia fell to her knees. "Please, my daughter is innocent. She didn't steal anything," she begged, tears pouring down her face. But Mama Fatima stood at the side, her lips curled in satisfaction. The crowd was too angry to think. Too impatient to listen. They wanted blood. Zara's screams tore through the air as the flames leaped onto her clothes, licking her small body with merciless heat. The crowd stood in a tight circle, their faces dark with anger and excitement. Some held their phones, recording the scene as if it was mere entertainment. Others shouted, "Burn the thief," their voices rising above the crackling fire. Cicilia collapsed to the ground, her hands trembling as she reached out towards her daughter. "No. My child. Stop this madness. She is innocent," she wailed, but her cries were drowned by the roaring flames. Zara's tiny hands twisted as she tried to shield herself from the pain, her feet kicking against the ground. "Mama. I didn't do it," she screamed, her voice breaking. Tears and sweat mixed on Cecilia's face as she begged the mob. "Please, someone help my daughter. She is just a child. Please, I beg you." But no one moved. No one tried to stop the fire. Some traders, who had known Zara for years, hesitated. They had never seen her steal before. She was always polite, always hardworking. But fear held them back. The mob had already decided her fate. To speak up now was to risk becoming the next victim. Mama Fatima stood at a distance, watching the scene with cold satisfaction. A cruel smirk played on her lips as she saw the fire rise. "Now let's see who will buy from them," she murmured under her breath. Zara's voice grew weaker, her words barely audible now. "Mama, please." Then, silence. The fire still burned, but Zara's body had stopped moving. The smell of charred flesh filled the air, mixing with the heavy scent of petrol. The crowd, once loud and aggressive, now grew quiet. The reality of what they had done slowly sank in. Whispers spread among them. Did she really steal? What if she was innocent? One man, who had earlier shouted for her to be burned, rubbed his head in regret. Maybe we should have waited. We didn't even check her hands for the money. But it was too late. Zara was gone. Cicilia rocked back and forth, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. My baby, my Zara. She whispered, reaching for the pile of ashes in front of her. She scooped a handful, holding it to her chest as if she could bring her daughter back. Her cries filled the air, but no one consoled her. The same people who had killed her child were now avoiding her gaze, their guilt pressing down on them like a heavy stone. Mama Fatima slowly backed away from the scene, slipping into the shadows. She had gotten what she wanted. With Zara gone, customers would have no choice but to buy from her. But what she didn't know was that the fire she had started would soon consume her too. For the spirit of the innocent never rests in peace. 4 days after Zara's brutal death, the streets of Onitsha carried a heavy silence. The spot where she had been burned still bore the blackened marks of the fire, a painful reminder of the innocent life lost. Cicilia refused to leave. She sat there, staring at the ground, rocking back and forth as if waiting for Zara to come back. Traders whispered among themselves. Some avoided Cicilia, too ashamed to face her. Others murmured regrets under their breath, wishing they had stopped the mob before it was too late. The man who had first accused Zara of theft later found his missing money in his other pocket. But it was too late. Zara was gone. Meanwhile, Mama Fatima believed she had won. With Zara dead, customers would finally buy from her. She sat behind her fruit stall with a triumphant smile, arranging her apples and oranges with pride. But her victory was short-lived. On the third night after Zara's death, strange things began to happen. It started with a whisper. Mama Fatima had just closed her store for the day, stretching her tired limbs before settling on her mat. The night was quiet, except for the occasional sound of a passing vehicle. She was about to close her eyes when she heard it, soft, distant, but unmistakable. Buy apples. Buy fresh oranges. Her eyes snapped open. She sat up, her heart pounding. Who's there? She called out, her voice shaky. Silence. She shook her head. It's nothing, she muttered, lying back down. But as soon as she closed her eyes, the voice came again. This time, it was louder. Buy apples. Buy fresh oranges. Mama Fatima bolted upright. She grabbed her lantern and hurried outside. The street was empty. The market stalls stood still under the moonlight. The only sound was the distant hoot of an owl. She took a deep breath and turned back to go inside. But then she heard it again. Buy apples. Buy fresh oranges. This time, the voice was closer. She spun around, her lantern shaking in her hands. Who is there? She shouted. The only answer was the soft rustling of the wind. That night, she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Zara's burnt face staring at her, her small mouth opening and closing as if trying to speak. The next day, Mama Fatima was restless. She snapped at customers, her eyes darting around the market nervously. She tried to act normal, but traders noticed she was jumpy. Even the few customers who approached her stall sensed something was off and walked away. That night, the haunting grew worse. She was halfway asleep when she heard the sound of tiny footsteps outside her window. Her body froze. The footsteps stopped right outside her door. Then, a knock. Mama Fatima's breath caught in her throat. The knock came again, soft but insistent. Buy apples. Buy fresh oranges. She let out a terrified scream and covered her ears. Go away. Leave me alone. But the voice only grew louder. Buy apples. Buy fresh oranges. She squeezed her eyes shut, rocking back and forth. It's not real, it's not real. She whispered to herself. Then, the window burst open. A cold gust of wind by morning, Mama Fatima was a shadow of herself. Her once fierce and proud demeanor had disappeared, replaced by fear and confusion. Her eyes were sunken, her clothes disheveled, and her hands shook as she tried to arrange her fruits. But no one came near her stall. The traders had noticed how restless she had become, how she now mumbled to herself and flinched at every little sound. Whispers spread through the market. She hasn't been herself since Zara died. I heard she screams at night. They say the dead don't rest when killed unjustly. Mama Fatima could hear them. She knew they were talking about her. But she didn't care. All she cared about was getting rid of the voice that refused to leave her alone. It was in her dreams. It was in the wind. It was in the silence. Buy apples. Buy fresh oranges. Day and night, Zara's voice followed her, echoing through the market, seeping into her thoughts. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She barely spoke. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mama Fatima staggered through the streets, her feet dragging as if they carried the weight of her sins. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to escape. But no matter where she went, the voice followed. Buy apples. Buy fresh oranges. She reached the very spot where Zara had been burned. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed to the ground. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her head. Forgive me, she cried. Please. I did it out of jealousy. I just wanted people to buy from me. The wind howled around her, sending dust and leaves into the air. The ground beneath her seemed to tremble. The traders, who were still in the market, watched in horror as Mama Fatima began clawing at her own skin, screaming. She's cursed, someone whispered. Zara's spirit will not let her go, another trader said. Mama Fatima's screams grew louder, more desperate. She saw Zara's burnt face everywhere, in the trees, in the shadows, in the flickering lights of the market. The ghostly figure of the girl stood before her, watching silently. Mama Fatima, the spirit whispered. Mama Fatima gasped. Her chest tightened, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. She clutched at her throat, struggling to breathe. Her eyes widened in terror, as an invisible force seemed to press down on her, suffocating her. She fell forward, her body shaking violently before going still. The market was silent. The traders, who had once watched Zara burn without stopping the mob, now stood frozen as Mama Fatima's lifeless body lay on the very spot where she had condemned an innocent girl. A cold wind blew through the market, rustling the stalls and lifting a few fallen leaves into the air. Some say Zara's spirit finally left that night. Others say her voice still lingers in the wind, a warning to those who choose jealousy over justice. But one thing was certain, no one ever forgot the day an innocent girl was burned, and the woman who wronged her faced justice from beyond the grave.
Thank you for watching Story Bees. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing African tales and bedtime stories. See you next time and keep the stories alive.